Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are, somewhere across our lovely world. Thanks for joining us live for the one and only, hopefully one and only Serverless Office Hours. We're streaming live on Twitch via the AWS channel, so welcome if you're joining us via Twitch. And also, if YouTube is your thing, absolutely fine. We are on the AWS Events channel, but you probably know that because you have joined us. But yeah, for some other people who are watching the recording, you're also welcome in the future. So yeah, please send us your questions, your comments. We are live, obviously. I'm Julian. I'm a developer advocate for mainly serverless here at AWS. And again, happy to welcome two gurus, both returning guests to Serverless Office Hours. So we didn't do so badly the last time if people want to come back. First up, John, you're a product manager. You look after a whole bunch of things. Tell us your journey of how you landed up being on the best Serverless Office Hours podcast in the world.
Yeah, thank you very much, Julian. And it is indeed the best serverless podcast that at least I'm aware.
It's not even a podcast; it's a live stream. Oh, my
live stream. Excuse me. Yes, video live.
I'm getting it wrong.
Yeah. So yeah, actually, again, yeah, returning guests. So thank you very much for having me back. I'm responsible for our managed Apache Airflow offering on AWS. So the first time I was here, I was talking about our provisioned Airflow offering, and looking forward to chatting today about our fully serverless offering.
Well, excellent. And just, I know it's a sort of some of the product organization or something, but Airflow is within a much bigger organization that looks after, data analytics and things like that. So is that, part of a bigger picture that, some teams can work nicely well together?
Absolutely. So we're part of the analytics org, and managed Apache Airflow, Amazon MWAA, is built into our SageMaker Unified Studio offering to make it easier for data discovery, data governance, and ML orchestration.
Ah, excellent. Sounds great. Well, we're going to be covering a lot of that. I have to always make my MWAA mwahaha. So somebody said it's one of these awesome services that it just has this sort of, I don't want to say evilness, but the awesomeness of it. Cool. Anyway, that's ridiculous, obviously. But Cayman, welcome back. I know you're in London on the sort of other side of town somewhere from where I am. Yes, but welcome back. So tell us your journey to Apache Airflow awesomeness.
Thanks, Julian, and really good to be back. I remember we had a show in 2022, I believe, where I was talking about custom connectors and Java and SDKs and so on. So we had an amazing time. Hopefully we will rise the bar again. For those who don't know me, hi everybody, I'm Kavan Sharvanjeev. I'm a principal specialist solutions architect with AWS. I've been with the company over just close about 6 years now, and I had a really fantastic opportunity to work with many service teams. But lately, for the last 2.5 years or 3 years, I've been working with John and his fantastic team on Managed Airflow for Managed Apache Airflow on AWS. We've launched a serverless, something that customers have been asking since day one. So super excited to be here and show you how you can jump and start using MWAA right away.
Cool, excellent. Well, MWAA, if you didn't catch what John had said before, managed workflows for Apache Airflow. So obviously this is AWS. We've got 1.5 of everything. We've got workflows in lots of different flavors. I mean, sure, you can run it on EC2 from other serverless workloads, the most recent being Lambda durable functions and step functions and all kind of things. So just over to you, John. Can you tell us, first of all, what is Apache Airflow? I know from the name, well, I do know what it is, but from the name, it's part of the Apache open source thing, which is awesome, cool. There's lots of Apache kind of products. What is Apache Airflow? What stands it out? How would people use it? Tell us about Apache Airflow, and then we can go on to the AWS managed version of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Apache Airflow has been around for quite a while. It's over 10 years now. It has emerged as sort of the de facto standard for orchestration of data, ML, DevOps workloads, that sort of thing. It is actually the largest Apache project by contributor. It's even bigger than Spark by a fair margin. So there's a lot of fingers on keys in there that have made Apache Airflow as great as it is today. And we have, back in 2020, we launched a managed version of it, which, yes, we named Wahahaha. So, yes, managed workflows for Apache Airflow. Because while everyone loved using Airflow, not everyone was in love with managing it, right? Having to install it, having to update it, having to create, make the authentication work, that sort of thing. And, we offered that capability, that service, as a provisioned offering. So you didn't have any servers to manage. Everything was built on ECS Fargate with Aurora in the back end, but it's still provisioned. You still had to decide you wanted the cluster, and decide you want to run it and optimize it and make it work the best they could. And this is great for anyone who was in that Apache Airflow space. But for some folks, that still offered a couple of challenges. One is you still have to know how Airflow works in order to get the most out of it, right? You need to understand how to optimize it. The second is it is provisioned, which means even though MWAA does auto scale out the number of workers, number of tasks that can be orchestrated, there's still a limit in sort of the overall capacity. So if you had, let's say you had a marketing data pipeline, you want to run your numbers once a day, but it was a huge amount of work. You had to provision it for that amount of work that you were running once a day, even if you didn't need it for the rest of the day. And then the other limitation was really around the data access of Airflow. The way that the Airflow clusters work is you tell it what it's allowed to access. But that means that each workflow in that cluster can access everything that the workflow can access, which is fine if you're using all of that entire cluster, that Airflow MWAA environment for the same thing, but you may not be. Maybe you have a finance team that has to run, a report once a month, but they can't allow that data to be accessed by anyone else. So this allows with a serverless offering, we can sort of solve all those problems. You don't have an environment, an Airflow cluster to manage. We take care of that for you. You don't have to worry about scaling. We take care of that as well. You put as many or as few workflows as you need, and then each workflow is able to actually have its own execution role, which limits exactly what it's able to access.
So that's an interesting thing. So with the serverless model, it's not just the infrastructure abstraction, all that kind of cool stuff, but actually each job that you run has that different authentication role. Hence, you can use it in a sort of I don't want to say multi-tenant, but you can use it in a multi-workflow way, but have more granular permissions. Am I understanding that right?
That's correct. Yeah, Airflow by itself is not inherently multi-tenant. There are some capabilities in there, but at the end of the day, if you can write a Airflow DAG, so a DAG is a directed acyclic graph. It's a type of workflow you can build, and those are authored in Python. And if you can write one of those, you can access most of the system. Whereas with MWAA Serverless, we were able to have a service that we offer whereby each one of those workflows is completely isolated. It runs on its, each task runs on its own isolated container with its own execution role, which means each workflow, not only can you tell it what the workflow is allowed to access, but you can also, for each workflow, say who can access that workflow.
Excellent. And obviously Apache Airflow being open source, is this running the open source thing that you could run it elsewhere? So I suppose there's a portability story as well. Are there any sort of differences or other kind of things that people would sort of understand between the sort of open source Apache Airflow you could run yourself anywhere and MWAA?
Yeah, so MWAA Serverless is 100% running open source Apache Airflow. We're running Airflow 3, which was released last year. And also, by the way, our provision is also running 100% open source Apache Airflow, which means that if you write a DAG for MWAA Serverless, you can absolutely take that DAG and run it on MWAA provisioned, or run it on your self-managed Airflow on EKS or on your laptop or wherever you'd like.
And by the way, Julian,
cool.
Not only we run 100% open source Airflow, but we also publish the Docker image that we are using in GitHub. So we will share a link. So anyone who uses MWAA can clone and build that image and run it locally for development purposes, but also to understand what's going on inside and being able to kind of configure their instance through startup scripts more efficiently and so on and so forth. So.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks, AWS producer Jeff behind the scenes doing all the magic. So yeah, within the chat, you'll see that the Docker image, and here it is on the screen as well. Cool, awesome. So customers, you talked about Python, you talked about data workloads, you talked about Python is obviously huge in the data world, obviously massive in the AI kind of world. Yeah, what kind of customers are using this, or is it sort of anybody and everybody? But if somebody's wanting to understand if they would fit into it, how would you How would you talk about that?
So broadly speaking, like Airflow itself is used for just about everything. I sort of touched on the three main use cases. One is around data pipelines. The second is around ML operations, and the third is around dev operations, so provisioning and that sort of thing. Certainly, data pipelines has historically been the largest use case for it, but ML pipelines, as you can imagine, are growing rapidly on this, and the flexibility of Airflow being, allows it to access pretty much anything and do it in whatever capability you wish. You're not ever limited by, I think there's, several hundred different operations that are already supported by open source Airflow. And if those don't fit you, you can write your own. So within our serverless offering, we deliberately made a choice to make it not quite so open-ended. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, of course, around that data isolation capability, the idea that, we needed to be able to provide a more rigid way of defining your workflows so that it couldn't sort of go outside of its box. So we did limit it to using an open source capability called DAG Factory, which means you can define your workflows declaratively using YAML rather than interactively using Python. Now, we still offer a direct Python conversion, so you can take your Pythonic workloads and convert them into this declarative format as well. But overall, with Airflow, you can run anything you want on it. Now, there's a couple of advantages from the serverless side of using that DAG Factory format, which again is also open source. You can download it yourself. We're using the exact same open source DAG Factory format. One is because it's declarative, it is very easy to define the limits of what it's able to do. And given that increasingly, especially more newcomers to development, are increasingly using agents and LLMs to write their code, having a declarative format makes it really easy to say what it can and cannot do. So I can very easily say, I want to take data from this S3 bucket, and I want to run this glue job against it, and I want you to query the resulting Parquet file with Athena or something like that. You can do that in English, and whereas if it was just developing Python code, there's a little more possibility for error there. With the YAML constraints, it's actually that the trade-off is you get less flexibility, but the advantage is that these LLM-based generation is far more reliable. In fact, we actually, I put together an MCP server over the weekend, just because that's what you do these days, and that's able to actually generate code and test code in MWAA serverless very reliably through our MWAA examples page. We have that on there, along with some of the use cases that you're going to see in a bit from Kevin. And so it's still open source, but by providing those guardrails, we still offer that capability, and you always can evolve to the full provision capable system if you want, basically run whatever you'd like.
Cool. See, yeah, lots on there. And obviously the LLM is fantastic. And I think with something, particularly these open source products, something that's been out for 10 years, the models are going to be well trained on that. They're not so sort of, really good being able to generate the kind of YAML, and I suppose even Python for those as well. So yeah, we're in the golden age of creating workflows and creating things, and even from CloudFormation and even infrastructure as code and Terraform and applications and everything, it is incredible what you can put together with.
But that comes with a little bit of a caution, right? Because we should not forget LLMs has been trained on historical data. And what I see today, because I work with a lot of customers who are adopting Airflow across the globe, is that many of those customers are already using AI and agentic AI to build those workflows. But we see sometimes a mixture of understanding of LLMs between versions of Airflow. Recently, there was a major release of Airflow 3. And so now we see that those LLMs have a catch-up game to do in order to make that, to catch up with the knowledge there. With DAG Factory and what we did with serverless, we are actually not only making it easier for LLMs, but also enforcing best practices on Airflow. Because as you already mentioned, Airflow is Python-based framework, which means that by default, you're writing your workflows in Python code. Now, give that to any Python developer, and they will start writing Python code. They will start putting the imports on top. They will start defining their tasks and so on and so forth. without actually realizing that some of those things may be perfectly fine for a Python code or a notebook that you're writing in Python, but it may be an anti-pattern or not a best practice in Apache Airflow world. So with Dark Factory and YAML expression language, we're kind of enforcing those best practices and setting up our customers for success from the beginning.
Yeah, and in fact, in the MCP server that was just kindly shown at the bottom here, I was able to actually very easily code in those best practices along with the experts. And then the other advantage of it, though, is it's still running open source Airflow, which means all that training on the output of those tasks and the failures potentially of those tasks. Not that anyone here would ever have tasks that fail, but let's say somebody wrote bad code that didn't necessarily work right away. It's had so much training on it, and one of the things that I actually included as an example in this MCP that I wrote was the ability to do live debugging, because it's able to actually go through and pull all the output logs from your task, because it's just plain old Airflow logs, which under the hood are just running Python. It's able to very easily tell you what went wrong. So you can ask it things like, hey, tell me how many tasks, how many of my workflows failed over the last 48 hours and why? And it will give you a very natural language reason. Oh, well, I didn't have access to this, and this one failed because something timed out or what have you. And it, increasingly, enabling that capability for folks that maybe are not experts in the Airflow space or just in the Python execution space, and really opening up the orchestration to more folks. This is one of the reasons why we were able to, or we included the MWAA Serverless as the default orchestration option within Amazon SageMaker Unified Studio, because what this allows us to do is folks that are writing notebooks or are writing queries and just interacting with their data and learning about their data, they're able to much more easily, create a production data pipeline without having to really understand and optimize it the way they would have had to in the past. And serverless really enables that, and being able to sort of expand out in these tools that do a lot of that development for you makes a big difference.
So should serverless just be the default choice? I mean, we're on serverless office hours, I know, so only slightly biased. And you did mention some of the trade-offs that serverless introduces, being more particular about things, but if people are trying Airflow or doing anything, I mean, should they just start with serverless and see how they go, or how should one think about it?
The way I would think about it is, if you're already using Airflow, we have a fantastic Airflow offering that is the full MWAA provisioned, that works exactly the same way as the Airflow that you can download yourself. There's no new learning curve. You're just there. If you want to take advantage of the ability of Airflow, and do some of that orchestration, especially in the context of your existing data that you have on AWS or elsewhere, really encourage trying it out on the MWAA Serverless through our SageMaker Unified Studio integration. Makes it really easy to get into, and then you're not locked in. If you write these workflows and you want to move on to either the provisioned offering because you want more control, or perhaps you're an EKS shop, you want to run it all in EKS and you want to move it over there, or move some of your workloads, you can do that.
And I often do an analogy with my customers when I'm trying to explain the tool as a private airplane, right? So if you think of it, if you make the analogy, if you take MWAA provision, it's almost like you're buying a private airplane. You have it, it's yours, and you can configure a lot of things, or reconfigure a lot of things. We are shipping the plane with the software installed, but you can do a lot of changes. With serverless, it's more like you are hiring the plane to get to the journey. Yes, you will get there, but you won't be able to necessarily remove the seats of the airplane or install something else, and so on and so forth. At least for now. We are working to make it a little bit more kind of open, so you can bring more things, but that will take time. So, yeah.
Cool. As long as Apache Airflow is showing good movies on the plane, I'll go with either option. I've been asking loads of questions. Please send us your questions and your comments in the chat as well. We do have some other people, Erie Edits, who joins us regularly. My favorite serverless office hours out there. Well, I love that as well. We've got Stay in the Pursuit 8427 via YouTube. Hello, just joined. Excited to be here. So yeah, welcome. We always have a very global serverless audience, so it's always lovely to see most of the continents that we are represented live. And obviously, as the clocks go round, we have people on the other side of the world watching. I suppose tomorrow. So next up, John Cayman, where do you want to go next? I'm in your hands.
Well, I think, we've been talking a lot about this, but we haven't really shown much yet. So maybe
demo is always
Cayman,
good.
if you'd like to, you know what, everyone likes a pretty picture to watch, but Cayman, just to show how easy it is to really start working in serverless Airflow, maybe it'd be a great opportunity to show that.
Cool.
Of course,
Can
John.
I bring your screen up, Cayman?
Please do, Julian. Okay, yeah, so we're going to start with the AWS console, right? So this is my home AWS console where you can search for Airflow, and you will find the main Apache Airflow on AWS, MWAA, as we know. So here, typically, the interface will default to the provision version. So I have one provision cluster here, as you can see, running version 306, where I can log into the UI, and this is pretty much provision stuff. So everybody who has used Airflow knows how that works. What we have here is also MWAA serverless. Now, MWAA serverless, we have started with a very kind of minimalistic design here on the console because everything, all the magic happens inside SageMaker Unified Studio. So here we're just showing you all the serverless workflows that you have already kind of scheduled. And again, like John said here, each of those workflows can be scheduled with its own AAM role, but also most importantly with its own networking configuration. So each of those can execute in a different VPC with different subnets, with different networking configuration and access to different kind of remote tools. Here you can have just a couple of actions, right? So you can either trigger a workflow, or you can see the logs, which are typically redirecting you to CloudWatch. That is where all the workflow logs are stored. And of course, if you want to create a workflow, that's where we're going to redirect you to SageMaker Unified Studio. Now, for those of you who don't know what SageMaker Unified Studio is, it's something that we launched recently and last year. We did a couple of iterations on it, but it kind of brings in together everything that you may need in terms of data, AI, ML development in one place. So you don't have to switch between different consoles, and instead focus on the business problem that you are trying to solve, and so on. So here you have many things such as notebooks, you have Visual ETL with kind of Spark engines and Athena and so on and so forth. But what we're going to talk about is workflows, right? So what we did with workflows is, in one of the kind of still missing features in open source Apache Airflow, is you have to write the DAGs that you have in Python code, right? You don't have this visual drag and drop interface that a lot of low-code, no-code users are used to. And we wanted to do something about it. And since we launched kind of MWAA serverless together in partnership with SageMaker Unified Studio, that allows us to build this interface, which allows you to kind of have the drag and drop interface. And it allows you to build your workflows extremely fast, right? So here we have the entire Amazon provider package. And so for those of you who don't know, the open source Apache Airflow is a very extensible product. So you can bring in what is called a provider package, which gives you the ability to communicate with anything, including AWS, other services, other cloud providers, and so on and so forth. And so that provider package gives you these constructs, which are typically operators or sensors or other things with which you can kind of communicate with the service. Here you can see we have things such as Amazon Athena, for example, Amazon Athena operator, or we have a SageMaker Unified Studio Jupyter notebook operator, right? So you can create those, you can drag and drop them on the canvas, you can wire them and configure them, right? So some of them are easy to configure, so you just write your query. Some of them may require some other inputs and so on and so forth. But for the sake of this demo, I built like a very small agentic AI loan application. What that does is, and I do appreciate that the view was not great because it's imported drop, so I didn't actually drag and drop it, but it was kind of imported from a deployment script, which we're going to share, by the way. If you want to deploy the same thing and run it in your environment, that's going to be perfectly possible. And essentially uses a couple of constructs from the Amazon provider package. It uses so the whole demo workflow is a loan application. It uses Amazon Bedrock and Bedrock knowledge base to kind of assess an application. And then there is another Bedrock model that will kind of take the output of the income validation and the due diligence, and it will apply common sense in the kind of LLM words and either approve or decline the application. So that one you can deploy with one click. We will share the link, and after you deploy it, all you'll have to do is just kind of run it. And I've already kind of run it a couple of times. You can see that I was testing up until the very last moment. So I like to live dangerously. And some of those have failed. Some of those I had to make some changes. But essentially, if we start drilling down, we can see that that is a workflow execution. So we have a couple of tasks that have already executed. And if we can starts to drill down, we can see some logs, what happened inside the task, and so on and so forth. And lastly, kind of this example workflow uses an SNS topic to send the approval or rejection of the application, which again I'm receiving as an email, but the email is kind of JSON, so it's not very easy to read. So I'm not going to show it here. But this is pretty much kind of how you offer and run serverless workflows inside SageMaker Unified Studio. I'll stop here.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So in a way, this is a front end that isn't part of Apache Airflow, but just built as part of SageMaker. And because it's a unified studio, it's all sort of all in together. Yeah, I mean, I can see the other
and by the way,
models and ETL and all that there.
Yeah, and by the way, if you are already user of MWAA or Apache Airflow and you have your docs written in Python code, we have made it extremely easy for you to convert those and run them in serverless. So we have open sourced a tool called Doc Converter, which uses the same kind of process that the actual Airflow system uses to read your Python and understand it and serialize it and stores it into the metadatabase in Airflow. But instead of doing that, is actually serializing it in YAML, which you can then import here and run in serverless in minutes.
So how much of that is a conversion? Because it's both Apache Airflow for both of them. So when you are importing something that is Apache Airflow and you're running, is the conversion into a SageMaker Studio thing, or is it into the MWAA serverless? I didn't quite get
So
that.
it's actually what we did was when Airflow actually processes a Pythonic DAG, what it's actually doing is it's executing that Python code and generating DAG objects, workflow objects, and task objects, which go inside that. And what Airflow does natively is it serializes that information to a metadatabase, so it can store it, and then it knows exactly what's going to, how it's going to be used. That's what it displays in the Airflow user interface, that sort of thing. What we did was we took the exact same open source DAG processor, which executes the code and determines what's to run, and simply change the serialization option. So instead of serializing it to a database, it serializes it to the open source DAG factory specification in YAML. So it's actually, it's a little multi-layered. We're using the open source processor with the open source DAG factory specification for YAML and just merge the two of them together. And that's what's in that library. So if you're using Airflow code, and in fact, you could even use that processor without using MWAA serverless. In fact, you can take your existing Python code, just run it and run the DAG factory yourself. So, we've really made a decision to, while we provide sort of curated experience like this for within the Unified Studio for customers that want to do that. We also are still adhering to the open source, open source tenets we have around MWA in general, right? We're using open source Airflow, we're using open source specifications, we're providing open source conversion tools if you want to go from one to the other. And you can build your own experience on it. Really, the Unified Studio experience is one opinionated experience built on MWA Serverless and Airflow. You can absolutely build your own experience. So for the developers in the crowd, and I think you've got a few of them out here, if I recall correctly, you can build your own Airflow experience. In fact, we had there were plenty of Airflow customers that are out there building their own Airflow experiences, and we think that the serverless capability unlocks even more of that. Unlocks the ability to build, leverage what Airflow does for you, but lets you build something that's bespoke for your own business case.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, and in the world of agentic AI, it's so easy these days, Julian, to build a kind of a front-end prototype on top of APIs. The APIs are very well documented in Airflow. You have access to all those APIs through MWAA, right? So, and you can build anything you want and just leverage the APIs. That's it.
Cool, excellent. So I did have another one just to put in the so lots of tools. The other way around, if somebody does create a workflow in this great visual tool, can they take it back and move it back into their Apache Airflow where they're running elsewhere or MWAA provisioned?
They absolutely can. In fact, Cameron, if you click on the little code view, so this is the open source DAG factory specification that we use to generate this. This is 100% portable. You can take this and run this with the DAG factory link that was posted earlier and run this on your self-managed Airflow. You could have it as a Docker image on your laptop or run it on any other cloud provider, and it will work exactly the same way. It's really important for us to continue that promise of being open source in both directions, right? It's not just to bring folks that are used to open source into the AWS ecosystem, and we hope we're friendly here. We hope you stick around, but you're never locked in. You can go and take it and move it elsewhere if your business needs change. And that also is true in general for what we do. So we have engineers that contribute directly to open source Airflow only within the MWA team. We also, of course, have the engineers that work on the provisioned offering and the serverless offering. And really our goal is to make it so you can run Airflow in whatever way makes sense to you. If it makes sense to have, self-manage it because there are certain things you want to accomplish that way, or maybe you just have a big investment in Kubernetes and you just makes sense to run things there, then you still can. But you're not locked in. If you ever wanted to move that to provisioned MWA, you could. And if you're ever deciding, well, I really don't want to manage those provisioned offerings, you can move to serverless. And really our ultimate goal is to make it so that the way you deploy Airflow is not determining what you do with Airflow.
Okay, because the Kubernetes is interesting because there's obviously a sort of split in Kubernetes between the API actions where lots of people want to use the Kubernetes API to do stuff, provision stuff, run things, connect to things, do all that kind of thing, and then also the data flow of it. Is there a story for people using the Kubernetes API but then connecting directly to Apache Airflow so that runs behind the scenes, or would somebody need to be running Apache Airflow in Kubernetes, if that makes sense, in the sort of data path?
Actually, one of the most common use cases we have is orchestrating Kubernetes with Airflow. Not necessarily running Airflow on Kubernetes, because really, if we're provisioning the containers, what does that matter? And what we think is an emerging use case for it. In fact, Cayman, if you go to the examples page on serverless, and there's an EKS example in there, you can actually orchestrate your EKS clusters and your workloads from serverless. So now you don't have to worry about any aspect of that. I can build these workloads. Now this is super simplistic. It's literally running hello world on a pod. I'm going to suspect that most use cases are more sophisticated than that. But in this example, it's actually doing everything from soup to nuts. It's creating the Kubernetes cluster, it's provisioning the compute, it's running stuff on the compute, and it's decommissioning at the end. You can use any combination thereof with a purely serverless offering. And then if your needs change and you want to run this on provisioned, you can. And if your needs change further and you decide that maybe there is a use case for running all of Airflow on EKS, you can do that too. And you're able to take this exact same code and have it portable no matter what your deployment strategy is.
Excellent, yeah.
And you don't have to write it, right? So John have made my favorite MCP server. I've never seen such a breadth and depth inside an MCP server where you can just fire a question and say, hey, build me a EKS kind of example. There you go. That's what you're going to get. But the interesting thing here is that John have kind of taken the liberty to use CloudFormation, the CloudFormation operators here. So essentially, he can provision, use, and decommission in a single workflow, which is also a interesting pattern that we start seeing with customers more and more often.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think it's an underutilized aspect of Airflow in general. We have lots of customers that use CloudFormation because that's what we have in-house, and we have customers that use Terraform because it's a little more powerful. Airflow is a really good DevOps platform. It makes because it makes really smart choices about provisioning things, right? And what do you do when things fail, right? And leveraging aspects like, in this case, either using explicit operators that perhaps create instances and such, or using multiple CloudFormation operators where you can create multiple stacks and monitor those stacks and do things if the stacks work or don't work. It's an incredibly powerful tool for that. And really where we see the blend of that a little bit is with with ML operations, right? Where you want to have the combination of provisioning models and experiments and building them up and making them work. And in parallel, you've got, you got to manage that infrastructure for it, but then you also got to feed the data into it, right? You need that data pipeline aspect. A lot of this training doesn't make sense without data to train it on. And, really, that's one of the really wonderful, powerful parts of Airflow is it really does all of that. You can use it as an infrastructure management layer. You can use it as a pure data pipeline. You can use it to manage all your ML operations, or you can mix and match it. And it's that power and that flexibility that really makes it stand out.
Cool. Yeah, because Daily Push has put a number of comments. Thanks for joining us via Twitch. So Airflow equals workers. Yes-ish, no-ish. It's more workflows if you want to think about that. And you did say so it takes place of Terraform. Not quite. It's just using Terraform to deploy other things elsewhere or on AWS. Because I think workflows, we talk a lot about workloads, data and ML and developers as well. But actually, basic, and I don't mean basic in a reductive way, IT automation is one of the perfect use cases for any workload tool, and I would assume definitely with Apache Airflow, because there are IT operations jobs that are just absolutely everywhere. And some people may think of it as user provisioning or this kind of thing, but building Kubernetes clusters, running ECS tasks, building dev environments that your developers can use, reacting to events, lots of event-driven stuff is workflow-based. So you have an alert that fires off and you need to spin up something, or you need to check logs, or you need to do something, or you need to do this and that. I'm being vague because literally there are so many different options. So, workflows and IT automation fit very well together. And I think what John was saying, which is interesting as well, is you've got that IT automation piece, but then also once you've built up all the IT automation in one place, they've got the whole data flow to get your data in there, and then any ML training and any operations actually using that data all in the same place. So I can see the use case.
Yeah, I think Julian also with the agentic AI era, right? What we start seeing is customers realizing that when they start running autonomous agents, right? They start seeing that these are open systems, they are non-deterministic, so they may orchestrate themselves in a certain way to achieve a task. But that may be different with every execution. And some of those processes, they need to be more deterministic. They need to be an audit. They need to be a straight process of how things has happened, documenting decisions, and so on and so forth. And I think Apache Airflow in general will have a bigger role to play here in this new world, but yet to see.
Yeah, no, I think that's also workflows. That's a huge use case of, what do people talk about in the real world? I need to orchestrate a whole bunch of agents. ta-da, we've got an orchestration tool here as well. And I think there's also, some people I talk to with orchestration, with workflows and orchestration, sort of also talk about the cost aspect of it. It's like, sure, you can send anything to an AI, to an LLM, and it is going to figure stuff out. But the more you're going to use the LLM to do some basic repetitive deterministic stuff, you're burning tokens that you're paying for. If you've got Apache Airflow or other sort of workflow systems up and running, this is running a Python script behind the scenes or doing an API call. Now, I'm not going to say they're free, but they are, very, very cost-effective ways to do things. And then you want to use the LLM for the intelligent LLM stuff when you need to make a decision or you need to call a tool or you need to do something. And, the orchestration fits perfectly with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of organizations are realizing that the cost of these LLM tools, they really there's a cost optimization point, which is super important. In fact, that was part of what I put in the MCP as far as diagnosing Airflow, the idea that I can, all of the back end stuff that's happening and pulling logs and determining what's going wrong and things like that are happening with a single call. But there's also another sort of hidden cost is around sort of how you operationalize these sort of tools. I noticed briefly in the chat, people, saying, well, how's this, how does Airflow work compared to Kubeflow, or how does it work compared to MLflow, or how does, or Argo, or one of the benefits of Airflow is, MLflow is probably a better tool for orchestrating ML capabilities, and Kubeflow is probably a better tool for orchestrating Kubernetes, tasks. But you're going to be hard pressed to find a tool that does all these things better than Airflow, right? And there's an additional cost that people don't often think about is, well, do you need to have someone who's an expert in Terraform for provisioning, and an expert in Kubeflow for their Kubernetes pods, an expert in MLflow for all their ML jobs, and maybe they pull in a tool like Argo or Dagster or who knows what else for all these other things. You can have people that are experts at all that, but if you have one person that knows Airflow, they can do all those things, and you can build tools, and the output from Airflow when things don't work is standardized, which means that I can have the tools like in my MCP example that can diagnose things that went wrong. And they don't need to know differently how to diagnose something from Kubeflow, because the errors are different than they are in MLflow, and the errors are different in Terraform, and some things work and some things don't. You can standardize this, and there is compromises to be made for that standardization, and those are the trade-offs. There are absolutely going to be use cases where a bespoke tool is going to be the right one. And for those cases, guess what? Airflow can work with Kubeflow, and Airflow can work with MLflow, and Airflow can work with Terraform, and obviously CloudFormation, because we've shown it in here. So, there are always going to be trade-offs in a standard generalized tool, but it's just the pure power of Airflow, and even some of the other areas where things are getting a little fuzzier too, right? Where Airflow has traditionally been for batch processing, right? The idea that once an hour you pull all your information out and you do something with that data, right? You do some sort of aggregate processing. Well, now with Airflow 3 and asset-based scheduling and event-based scheduling around that, you can now have Airflow trigger on an asset change, right? It triggers on when a model finishes, and it triggers on when a file lands in S3, and it triggers on these event-based. And now sort of that gray area between what an event-based processor and a streaming processor does versus what Airflow does as a traditional batch processor, that's also becoming a gray area. So now, depending on what you want to do, you've got this one tool in Airflow that does a pretty good job at being an event-driven architecture, and pretty good job at provisioning, and a pretty good job at orchestrating containers, and a pretty good job at doing ML orchestration. And it gives you that flexibility to say, I can standardize on a tool, and I can still bring in specific use cases as needed, but I don't have to learn 10 different tools to be able to do these essentially things that are do things in an order, respond intelligently if they fail, and let me know what happened.
So I suppose that just broadens then the use case of something like Apache Airflow, because I know we've talked about the data scientists and maybe some DevOps people, data engineers as well. But I suppose because it's a workflow automation, and it's very interesting actually. You were talking about the streaming and the sort of event-driven workloads, because that is absolutely huge, because a lot of things are event-driven, whether you choose to admit it or not. And having to have a tool in front of Airflow to orchestrate that would be another tool. So if it can do that automatically would be great. So, are there any other sort of kind of people you can think of that I haven't mentioned that would be useful for Airflow, or maybe non-traditional, non-data engineers maybe that you would think would pick up Airflow when they wouldn't have thought of beforehand?
Well, I think with this tool, I mean, Cayman can briefly show you. Let's say if you're a data scientist that's playing around with a notebook, right? And you're just doing some data discovery and you're trying to figure something out. What integrating this into Unified Studio allows us to do is it softens that gap between your experimentation and your production. You can build your notebook out, you can try and experiment it a bit, see what works, see what doesn't, and very quickly build that into a workflow that now can do things every day. And you can start experimenting in different versions of that notebook, and maybe I try running this and I make some changes and some experimentation on what I'm doing as a data scientist. And when that improves, I incorporate that new version of the workbook into my workflow, and that becomes my daily process or my hourly process or whatever, right? So, one of the things this tool allows you to do, and broadly by tool, I mean broadly, not just Airflow or MWAA serverless, but also SageMaker Unified Studio, is the ability to, open up these and making it just a lot friendlier to more users, right? You don't, I love developers. I think of myself as a developer. Not everyone's a developer, right? Not everyone writes great code, right? And you shouldn't have to get to, if you have a business problem to solve, you shouldn't have to be a developer to do that.
Yeah, John, it looks like I didn't have the data pipeline with the notebooks, but what I'm trying to do now is to download it from kind of the provisioned Airflow. So this is a Python file, and I'll just quickly convert it so we can see how that works as well.
But just broadly speaking, the idea that we want to have, we want to democratize data, right? And again, this isn't just an MWAA thing. This is really broadly speaking, what the goal is around SageMaker Unified Studio, and I would dare say across AWS in general, is democratizing that data, make it easier to get at, give you a curated experience where we still don't get in the way of the developers. We still love our developers. We want you to build things, and something like Sage or like MWAA Serverless still caters to those developers. You can build your own experience on it, but you don't have to be. And you're all of a sudden now you getting value of your data, and tying it into the discussions we've had around LLM, one of the things I find most interesting about LLM is often it's not as good if you know what you want to do, but it's really good when you didn't know what you wanted to do, and it'll come up with sort of new ways, like new ideas, new ways of running your accessing your data, new things maybe you didn't think of before, and that experimentation process is great. And so if we can, enable that, lower the bar for that experimentation and find out how you can get more value and unlock new business cases and make your data work for you better, that's all the more powerful.
Cool. Yeah, that is a great story. And I'm sort of watching in the background as Cayman just quickly,
I know
he just does some conversions and sorting some stuff out. I love it. Live demos. Yeah. This is why we're on Serverless Office Hours.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So exactly. And so we're trying to do, and you can see we've came and took took an existing Pythonic workflow, ran our conversion tool on it, brought it into SageMaker Unified Studio to do some editing on it. This is live demo, so who knows what it's going to do at the end of this, but in general, that's the process.
And so again, this is the Python code, yeah. There you go. This is the Python job that I just downloaded, the Python DAC, and I used the converter tool. So I said just that converter convert. It kind of figured out what needs to be done, and it kind of piped out the output as a YAML file. From there, I just imported it. Of course, I saved it. I don't know if it's going to run because AAM row may be a kind of an issue, but why not? Let's be brave. I'll run it and see what's going to happen. But yeah,
that's the excitement. You don't, sometimes you watch sports with the crashes. So.
Yeah, this, by the way, is the exact same workflow that we have in our Immersion Day content. So we have for those of you who don't know, AWS have an Immersion Days for most of the AWS services, if not all. And that's kind of a learning material where you can go and with your self-pace, on your own pace, learn about the technology. We can paste a link for the folks if they want to kind of try to do that. The current Immersion Days, however, only for provision. We are currently in the making of a brand new shiny one for serverless. So that will come soon.
Serverless is
But
always
yeah,
shiny. Awesome.
Yes, same pipeline. I just had it on my provision cluster because I was testing it. So I downloaded it, converted it, imported it here. And if all the stars aligns in the right direction, that will succeed at some point. It's still in queue, so that may take a few minutes to run after it.
And so in the background, we're because this is a every single task is running a single tenant. In the background, we have to process the workflow and then allocate individual containers that are going to run each of these tasks. So there is still that aspect of it, and we're going to as we our overall goal on this is to, first of all, this process that Cameron just showed you, make that smoother as well for bringing things into self-managed or provision, bringing them into serverless, adding more capabilities into serverless as well, make sure more of those provision and more of those self-managed Airflow capabilities are available, and just improve the overall experience. And then also our team on the SageMaker Unified Studio side that does a great job with the workflows experience you're having here, we're going to continue to improve that experience too. So this is still early days. We still have lots we want to deliver, lots of exciting stuff coming.
Cool. Excellent. So just some other things. I'm just thinking operationally, observability, security, governance, performance, those kind of things. Anything people should be thinking of as they're thinking for Apache Airflow?
Yeah, I mean, it's
lots, I'm sure.
There's lots. Yeah. So it's important to note that both MWAA provision and MWAA serverless, you control the access via IAM roles. So on MWAA provisioned, it's at the cluster level. So the entire MWAA environment uses an execution rule that defines what it is allowed to access. You also can bring your own connections in. So through Secrets Manager or directly through the Airflow user interface. So if you want to connect to Databricks or Snowflake or whatever, you can do that easily from there as well and bring them in however you'd like. That is all controlled via the individual Airflow environment. And then on the MWAA serverless side, we just simply take the extra step of making it on the individual workflow side, so that every single workflow you can have fine-grained control and say, I'm allowed to access exactly these buckets and these jobs and these queries, and I can access all those in a very sort of discrete way. As we say and live, security is job zero at AWS, and we always make sure that trust and security are always something that are forefront, and we want to that is something we take very seriously.
And from an observability standpoint, Julian, you do not fly the plane without monitoring every metric on the airplane while it's in the air, right? We want to get there. So similarly in Airflow, and especially for provision, right? Because in provision, the cluster is provisioned by MWAA service team, but you have all the flexibility to customize things, to change configuration in Airflow, to bring in more extra workers, do a lot of things, right? And when you do those things, you may introduce unwillingly, of course, some bottlenecks or some other things. So having a proper monitoring in place is absolutely the best practice, and something that is the first thing I start every call with the customer when I'm talking about MWAA. Show me your CloudWatch dashboard where you are measuring your metrics of your cluster. It's super important, specifically for CPU and memory usage, because those things runs in containers, and we all know what happens, how many bad things could happen if your container is running on for a long time and hitting 100% CPU or 100% memory. The whole OS and the underlying OS can mess up. Bad things could happen, and so on. So always put a proper monitoring in place, observability in place. You're lucky with MWAA, both serverless and provision, because we stream all sorts of metrics and logs inside CloudWatch. Those goes on the actual cluster in the sense of provision, and it drills down all the way to execution details. So if your task is taking longer than expected, you'll be able to find that out through CloudWatch metrics, because we stream those metrics in here. So a lot of things.
And yeah, so this is what you would see from the provision side, and the beauty is if you're looking at this saying, well, I don't want to deal with that, no problem. That's what serverless is for. So if you don't want to have to worry about these sort of metrics, serverless, we take care of that for you. You just decide what the job is you want to have done. You define your workflow to do it, and we take care of the rest.
Cool. And yeah, a question I thought of when we were talking about provision and serverless mode, is Apache Airflow running in the Apache Airflow account, or is it running in your own account? Just thinking network connectivity and that story.
Absolutely. So MWA provision and serverless both can connect to your VPCs with your network. So you have full control
in the service. Is there a service VPC that you run it in, but it can connect to a customer VPC? It's not running in my VPC. If I was
that's a great nuance. So we own all the compute. There are service VPCs attached to it. Each provision MWA environment has its own single tenant service VPC attached to that environment where the metadatabase and web servers are controlled. And both serverless and provision, you provide the option to connect to your VPC. In the case of in both MWA provision and serverless, if those workers run in containers attached to your VPC, so they're service owned, but from a networking standpoint, they would appear, if you look for their ENIs, for example, their network interfaces, those would show up on your network, right? So they kind of live a little in both worlds. On the provision side, there are VPC endpoints that are used to communicate between the service-owned VPC and the workers that are running on your VPC. And that's because of how Airflow communicates to its metadatabase. In serverless MWA, you don't even need that. We actually have essentially the containers live in both worlds, so there's no VPC endpoint required.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I mean that's what I love of the serverless options, where it is just running in a managed account. As a customer, I can't break my MWAA by disconnecting a network interface or breaking an EBS. So yeah, I love that story of doing that as well. We've only got 2 or so minutes left. People may be thinking Apache Airflow, step functions, both workflows, Lambda durable functions. How would you paint the picture of differences and benefits?
It's a great question, and it's certainly a source of a lot of confusion in some cases. Because you can sort of, like with all these other tools, you can do a lot of the same things with these different capabilities. The way I sort of keep it straight in my head is Airflow is really an application. It's something you apply to it's a full end-to-end application it's very flexible, but at the end of the day, it's orchestrating tasks between one step to the next. It has the concept of time and state and the way things relate to each other. But it's not meant to be at the scale as part of a microservice orchestration, right? I wouldn't use Airflow to process logins. I wouldn't use Airflow to process, shopping carts, things that are highly on demand, right? If I'm building an application like that, that's where something like a step functions comes in. And if you're looking at something sort of more that runs on longer term, looking at Lambda durable functions, right? If you're a developer where you want to control or build a microservice or an architecture, you're not going to do much better than step functions. It's a fantastic tool, and obviously Lambda has been the standard for serverless compute for a very long time now, and that's how you're going to build those applications. If you are a data engineer or a DevOps engineer and you're looking for just more power about building your business logic and your data pipelines, especially in a serverless manner, where you do want to control and have that level of view on it without the provisioning, but you're not building a larger scale application, then really Airflow in general and MWA and MWA serverless are the place to look.
Cool. And I suppose if you want to use open source, but you don't want the hassle of running open source, that's also the extra icing on the cake or something.
Yeah, absolutely. That and that's a great point. Is that it is that portability, right? I mean, we hope we are continuing to offer a great enough Airflow experience that you'll never want to go anywhere else. But if you ever did choose you wanted to, you can. You're not locked in any way, shape, or form when you're running Airflow on MWA.
Excellent. Well, John came in. Thanks so much for spending time. I loved hearing about all our other serverless services as well, and all the thought and attention that's gone into it, and the cool performance things in the serverless mode, and the SageMaker Studio looked super cool as well. So thank you for joining us, and everyone who's watching now live and in the future when you're watching the recording. Thank you for spending time with us with Serverless Office Hours, and we'll be back same time, same place next week. Bye-bye.